Hi, I'm Alicia Harlov.
I'm Lisa Aegis Gillibert.
I'm Catherine Christensen.
And I'm Becky Bond. And welcome to the Hoof to Horse podcast, where we dive into important discussions on horse care, welfare, and bettering the equine life. Welcome back to the Hoof to Horse podcast. Tonight, we're going to be talking about a topic that I think in the horse industry and in hoof care, there isn't a general consensus on, and that topic is hoof landings. But we have a social media presence, so we have like an Instagram and a YouTube and a Facebook, and we had posted a video comparing 3 different hoof landings on 3 different horses, and we asked the simple question, which horse do you think is landing best? And it was so interesting to see the wide variety of answers that we got. And it really underlined the fact that even professionals in the field have different feelings on this. So we wanted to get together and talk about that tonight.
Yeah. Yep, definitely.
Yeah. So I guess maybe we should start by explaining to anyone who might not know, what are we looking for when we're looking at hoof landings, and why is it important to be observing those, and how do we observe those? Is that something you can do with the naked eye? Should we be documenting it in a different way? Like, how do you guys document it in the field, et cetera?
Well, maybe Alicia can go first, because the 3 videos were your videos and you document a lot of landings.
Yeah, I mean, I got into hoof care because I had a horse that was lame and he was diagnosed with navicular issues, which is pain in the back half of the foot, essentially. And so I learned about biomechanics and hoof landings because I went to England to a farm called Rockley Farm, where they rehab navicular issues barefoot on a track system. And what was sort of drilled into my head, through talking to the owner there, Nick, and seeing the horses there and watching their movement, is that a healthy distal limb or lower part of the leg and a hoof is going to fully extend in movement and land at a forward walk on a flat level surface at the back half of the foot, so the heels, the frog, because that helps to dissipate and disperse the ground reaction forces that they are encountering from the ground moving around, and helps to mitigate them as they move up the limb. So it's protective of the soft tissue, it's protective of the joints. And on the other hand, I learned, looking at this from a navicular space, that a lot of navicular diagnosed horses ended up having these issues due to almost a repetitive strain type injury from improper biomechanics, where the hooves are not landing in a way that's protective of internal structures. And just like any athlete, like if you played softball or basketball or football and you're, throwing a ball in a certain way over and over again, that's not appropriate for your body, or if you're running in a certain way that's not appropriate, it's going to affect your soft tissue and internal, structures, to where you can have repetitive strain injuries. And what I learned in England was that these navicular diagnosed horses basically had repetitive strain injuries from improper movement. And as they saw these horses go through rehab and become sounder, they were going from protective movement, where they were landing like toe first or more flat, to an extended heel first movement. And that heel first movement and proper movement of the soft tissue was allowing those internal structures to strengthen, but also heal. It was like physical therapy. So I'm really passionate about that. And why I film so many landings is because I've seen these horses that were written off as, lame, had to be retired, should be euthanized. As they became sounder in their rehab journey, they started to move in a way where they're fully extending and landing more heel first. And I know that that's not a scientific, it's not a research paper. It's not a peer-reviewed study. But it's kind of hard to deny when you're seeing these horses go from lame to sound, and then you're filming these landings. And I filmed, like, Lisa said, I filmed for the video on social media. If anybody looks it up, I filmed all of those horses, and I know their histories, and I know, how they're moving when we were taking that video. So yeah, I don't know if anybody has anything to add. I know that's sort of a long-winded answer.
No, I love that you like gave so much information in that. Thank you for that, Alicia. I think for me, it's interesting. Landings is definitely something that I take into account, but maybe for my personal like practice isn't something that I prioritize maybe as much as you might. And so I'm generally pretty happy if the horse comes through and lands flat to heel first. I'm happy. I'm going to be more concerned if they're coming through and landing toe first.
Hmm.
So actually, I wanted to ask you guys, now that you're bringing up like what you're looking for in the landings, because I've heard the same thing, like flat to slightly heel first, but is it different at different gates?
Oh,
And
absolutely.
so what gates are you looking at in particular when you're looking at heel first landings?
A forward walk for me or a trot, anything faster than just grazing speed.
Yeah.
You might know when they amble along, they nom nom nom, and then they amble along. I don't care if a horse is landing toe first there because the ground reaction forces are so minimal compared to what the hoof, usually deals with. I don't care about that. But if the horse is moving with purpose, I like to see a very slight heel first landing at least. I personally, I'm not satisfied with a flat landing unless there's the whole context of the horse to me. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, it might be the least of my worries in the
Yeah.
whole context of the horse, but if the rest of the horse is healthy, I'm like, well, why is this horse not landing confidently heel first? What's going on a flat surface? I like to see it on hard, firm, like concrete, like a slightly heel first on concrete, on gravel, on grass, on all different types of surfaces in the arena, especially at the walk in barefoot horses, or in all horses, and I do assess horses' movement going slightly up and downhill. I've got some very slight, especially at my place where I assess a lot of horses. I like to see the way that horses like change their movement depending on the incline. And obviously, walking downhill, most horses will land pretty obviously heel first, just because of the way that the ground drops away from the limb. So it's very easy to have a long extended stride and land heel first. If a horse is landing flat or even toe first going downhill, that's a big warning sign for me. They're really
Same.
protecting something there, whether it's in the hoof or higher up.
Hmm.
I don't know. You would have to analyze that individual case, but that's a big deal for me. And then
Yeah.
moving uphill, if they're still letting heel first moving uphill, then that's
They're
maybe
probably
they're trying
tilting.
to protect something else,
Yeah, yeah.
you know? So you got to take the
I
incline
just
into account.
want to add in there that the faster you go, the more pronounced a heel first landing would be or should be. So if you were assessing it in a trot, you're going to get a more heel first landing than you would in a walk. And more so in a canter and a gallop, it should go
Yeah.
more and more heel first.
I guess maybe we need to take a step back and just talk about the biomechanics of the limb briefly. So, and even this is not even the biomechanics of the limb is like hotly contested at the moment. Not evident, like not in the scientific community necessarily or the professional community, but definitely online. Um, so you have got two different phases of the stride. You have stance phase and you have swing phase. Okay, stance is when the hoof is on the ground, and swing is when the hoof is not on the ground. When the hoof is on the ground and we have got lift off on the heels, right? That point is called breakover. If you hear breakover a lot, that is the point that the heels just lift off the ground and the toe is still on the ground. And when we talk about reducing that breakover, it's about making that toe shorter so that that big long lever arm is less, okay? The shorter your breakover point is, or the faster your breakover, the quicker the horse is able to pick its leg up and have a nice long stride and have a straight limb before it comes in and lands. The reason the
Can we
straight
just
limb, sorry,
add a little bit there?
of
So you
course,
can't actually make breakover faster.
no, no, I
Sorry. So
understand that.
yeah.
Yeah, so breakover is not it's a moment in time. It's not something that happens quicker. So what I mean by that is that, thank you
So
for
what
pulling me
you
up on that.
can do is you can make it slower. So
Yes.
if we had more toe length, more leverage, we can slow down breakover by having more of that, but it will get to a point that it is at an ideal and you can't make it faster than ideal.
Yes, correct. Yeah, yeah. So with an ideal breakover. So the way I explain it to my clients is, being able to, wearing big long clown shoes and having a long toe, it's really hard for you to pick that foot up and have a nice long stride, and you end up shuffling. Whereas if you have your normal shoes on, you can easily pick your heel up and break over and have a nice long stride. So in order to land heel first, the leg needs to have enough time to go through the swing phase and come and straighten up before landing. So, and it's not just the hoof that affects that, it's the whole body. But when we're moving faster, there's, especially in the trot and in some horses, there's more cadence, I guess, there's more air time. So the limb has got more time to be able to come straight.
And momentum too.
And momentum, that's right. So the reason that we find it, and when I say we, I mean myself and people who are like-minded to me, the reason why we want to see a heel first landing is because of the deep digital flexor tendon that runs down the back of the leg, okay, over the top of the navicular bone and attaches to the bottom of the pedal bone. For those watching, I have a pedal bone in front of me, right? And it attaches to the bottom of the pedal bone. And we have our navicular bone that sits behind that area. Now, the navicular bone kind of, very simply, it acts like a little bit of a fulcrum, or not a pulley. Pulley's the wrong word, but a fulcrum, right? So because it comes down the back of the leg and goes over the top of the navicular bone, and the navicular bone, it is attached to the other bones in there, but there's a little bit of movement, especially depending on the joint and what's happening with the joint. So the navicular bone can move a little bit in relation to the joint in the bottom of the foot. Tendons are stronger when they have tension on them. Okay, they're more able to withstand like knocking forces and things like that. They work better when they have a little bit of like not too much tension, but ideal tension on them. If you pick up your horse's leg and you notice the tendons on the back of the leg, they're all soft and floppy. How is that meant to support anything? It can't, right? But then when you put the hoof down and the hoof is weight bearing, feel those same tendons. They are like hard, like a steel rod. Okay, so back to the deep digital flexor tendon runs over the navicular bone. If a horse lands toe first, the deep digital flexor tendon is not fully taut around, it doesn't have its full tension that it needs around the navicular bone. And then there's a snap down to heel. That pressure is put directly onto the deep digital flexor tendon and the navicular bone, when the flexor tendon should be supporting that navicular bone fully when that hoof hits the ground. There is like a snap in that area, and that causes significant soft tissue, long-term soft tissue damage. You said there's repetitive strain injuries.
Yeah.
That is what's happening. If your horse is landing toe first, it's a repetitive strain injury to not just the deep digital flexor tendon, but the little ligaments that attach the navicular bone to the other bones in that joint. Would you agree with that, Alicia? You probably know a bit more than that than me.
No, I totally agree.
Yeah. So when the horse lands heel first, when the hoof is still in the air and that joint is more open at the back, the deep digital flexor tendon has got its full tension on it. And then when it lands, it's fully supporting that navicular bone in that area. That to me is irrefutable evidence that a horse should be landing heel first at any speed, like at speed, at anything where there's just in that area. There's plenty more evidence, but.
Yeah.
And I think
absolutely.
too, one of the things that it's interesting because the veterinarians that I've talked to, there are some veterinarians that are on board with this and some who aren't. And it's the idea that, for a very long time, the gold standard of diagnosing navicular disease was changes to the bone.
Mm.
But there's significant evidence now that show that it's actually inflammation of the soft tissue structures that occurs first. And it's the chronic inflammation that causes the bony remodeling. So once you have the remodeling, there's already an inflammatory process that's probably been going on a long time, as Alicia says, a repetitive strain type injury. And what's tricky about that is that the imaging that we have available in the field is typically not suitable for diagnosing specific soft tissue injury because it can't penetrate the hoof capsule. And a lot of those soft tissue structures are really tiny and hard to see on like, you know, field imaging. Like a CT scan's not going to do it, you know, like a not CT, an ultrasound. An ultrasound is not going to do it in the field. Although Alicia and I were just talking about a veterinarian who has a new technique used in the field, which is really cool that there's like stuff coming down the pipeline that will help with in-field diagnostics. But something that has interested me a lot because so I'm trained through the same program that Alicia was trained through, and we talk a lot about heel first landings. And in my own career, I've gotten to watch a lot of horses move, and I think there are so many things that can impact a horse's landings. And you know, in the very beginning, I always took that as there has to be pain at the back of the foot somewhere. Like that's why that horse is landing toe first, right? If it's not landing heel first. And then I started like meeting horses who I was recognizing were like really tight through the back of the leg. So they like literally couldn't extend the leg. And I could trim until the cows came home, but like until that horse had like a full rehab plan to help stretch those out, we really didn't make much progress on the toe first landing. So I guess I'm wondering from you guys who have seen a lot more horses than I have, what other things can impact landings? You know, like what makes a horse land toe first?
That is a really good question. And there's so many things that can impact landings. And I mean, Lisa already mentioned inclines and declines. I've seen different footing impact landings, and it could be something as simple as a horse that is more sensitive on harder footing or gravel that can shift their landing, where they can land heel first on softer footing and then all of a sudden shorten their stride on harder footing. But I've also seen really deep footing where it's harder for the horse to, I mean, work through that. I mean, think about us running on the beach. It feels like we're, you know, clumsy and we're not able to get out of our own way, and you're not able to think about how you're moving your legs because you're trying to get your legs out of the sand or your feet out of the sand. So there's, you know, different footing that can impact it. You know, what we put on their feet. If you're putting any kind of hoof protection boots, that can improve landings if it's adding comfort, or if it's adding weight. A lot of times horses will have to like throw their foot out in front of them because something's like heavier on their foot. You know, a trim can change their landings, and that might be good or bad. It could be that, you know, they're suddenly sore and they have to shorten their stride. Or I've seen horses that are more heel first when, like Lisa was saying, we're, you know, reducing their breakover, and that might allow them to kind of get the foot off the ground in a way that allows them to extend better. But if the back half of the foot is not strong, or if the frog is sensitive, or if it's weak, then that can actually be almost too much too soon on the back of the foot. So there's so much, it's such a huge topic, and it's really hard to reduce it to like heel first landings, you know?
Yeah. That like when you were saying just now, a horse that you know, you take their toe as short as you can take it, and they walk off fine, and then a few days later they're really, really sore and they're landing toe first again because the back of the hoof is not ready for that. Could be thrushy, could have soft tissue damage or needs the soft tissue build or whatever. When we're making our trimming decisions, that's so important to recognize that if I bring this toe back to this area now, I'm going to be overloading some tissue that's not quite ready to have that yet. So in that situation, I would prioritize, you know, protecting the back of the foot, maybe leaving the toe a little bit longer, and tolerating, for me, a flat landing as part of the bigger picture. Does that make sense? But myself, I never tolerate a toe first landing.
Yeah. And I think, like you're saying, in those instances, that's where we can use boots and pads for extra support. Or at my farm, I know that not everybody has this option, but if I notice a horse has a really weak back half of the foot, and if I want to do something to sort of encourage it, I'll use like a deep bed of pea gravel to kind of stimulate those structures where it's still conformable and not painful. If you do it too shallow, it can be really painful.
Yes.
But anything that can kind of stimulate those structures without needing to do too much work for the foot, like then more than the foot can handle.
Here's a question. Why does the back of the foot need stimulation if it's weak and they're not landing heel first? What is missing? What, in your experiences, why is stimulation important to the back of the foot?
Well, the digital cushion is a, use it or lose it kind of structure. In my experience, I don't know if you guys have seen horses that move to a different environment and you actually see the back half of their foot deteriorate, or if they go to an environment where they're moving more and you see that area bulk up. And that's the shock absorber for the
Yes.
foot.
Yeah. So
Um,
I wonder what it is about the pea gravel then that allows the back of the foot to like be comfortable and to be stimulated. Is it the horse? And because you say it needs to be fairly like deep, we say 10 centimeters deep. So what's that? Like 3 4
4 inches.
3 4 inches
Yeah, I
deep?
usually say 4 to
Yeah.
6 inches. Yeah.
So the horse can like choose its own angles, right? And I think we've spoken a little bit about this before on the podcast, maybe. The way the angles of the hoof dictate the blood perfusion throughout the foot. And nothing can grow or heal or anything like that without sufficient blood flow. I'm just trying to link some things here for our listeners
Yeah.
that, if you're noticing your horse is leaning here toe first or flat and you're wondering, well, what do I do about this? Then, there's a lot of management things, not just trimming or shoeing, or booting. There's a lot of management things that can be done to help improve that, right?
And so actually that brings up a great point. I think one of the things I hear a lot, which I find a little frustrating myself, is to hear that the gold standard for soundness is to have rock crunching hooves.
Yeah.
However, hooves adapt to the footing that they live on. So it is not realistic to expect a horse who lives on pasture like soft grass or soft sand footing to then go out and this is not a blanket statement to all horses, because there are some horses that just, it doesn't matter
Yeah.
what you do with them, they just have great feet. But I wouldn't say that's most horses.
Yeah.
So owners, especially owners that are coming to barefoot for the first time, I think will get frustrated because they'll say, well, like I take my horse out for a trail ride and like my horse is uncomfortable. But when I look at the horse in the environment they live in, they're sound. And so that's where it's like, you have to, in my opinion, you have a couple options. Like you can either adjust your environment and your management so the hooves are getting the type of stimulation and conditioning that you want them to get to match the environment you ride in.
Yeah.
Or when you take them into an environment that the hoof isn't used to, you have to use some sort of hoof protection. So that, typically we talk about using boots and pads in that case, if you're wanting to keep the horse barefoot when they're turned out. So I think that sometimes is something that owners get confused about, is like, oh, my horse should be able to go barefoot and be rock crunching on all surfaces.
Yeah.
But that's so dependent on the management.
Truly rock crunching horses, I think might account for 5% of healthy barefooted horses.
And it depends on how much work they do. Honestly, I find the ones that are in more work, so like your endurance horses, those that are actually going out and doing a lot of Ks, they're going to have much better, healthier feet than those that are standing around in a paddock.
The word you used before, Becky, conditioning the feet. We condition the rest of the body. Why, as an industry, do we not think about conditioning the feet as well?
Going kind of back to the pea gravel, I wonder if that's also partially the pea gravel is helpful in that way, where it's a forgiving stimulation, but it also helps to, I've seen horses that had really thrushy frogs that are then exposed to pea gravel. And I think just that stimulation from the pea gravel helps to generate healthier frog tissue growth. And then that allows the back of the foot to be more comfortable. So they're willing to land in a healthier way.
Yeah.
And I just think that having that exposure in a gentler type form of a rock gravel can help the foot to become more accustomed to more abrasive terrain.
Yes, I
Kind of
agree.
connecting that.
I think it's important to note, because we've spoken a little bit about pea gravel now, that pea gravel is round stones and they're smaller. They're like 10 millimeters
Yeah.
is what we
Or
say. So what's that in
usually say,
freedom
so I've
units?
always heard as 3/8 inch, which I don't know how many millimeters that is.
3/8 of an inch. I can't tell you. 10 millimeters, 3/8 of an inch. It's small-ish.
That's the same size. That's about the same size.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome.
Because it's move in relation to a horse's foot. It moves enough. It's like it would be like sitting on bean bags for us.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think, like standing on like a bean bag. That's what it's like for horses. So if you have the ability to put pea gravel down especially in your horse's loafing areas where they like to hang out, say underneath their favorite tree, or it's good through gateways and high traffic areas, although it does tend to move. So you need to have management processes to keep it where it needs to be. You would be shocked at how little you need to do. You don't need to keep your horse on a complete gravel
Mm-hmm.
track,
Right.
in my experience.
Somewhere that they move over daily.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
also something about conformable surfaces, which I think pea gravel is. Sand kind of falls into this category
Yes.
too, although I think sand can be more difficult for horses that are rehabbing soft tissue. Like I think pea gravel is a little bit firmer, so they don't get
Yes.
that same. But so like I have terrible footing here, honestly. Like I have very hard, abrasive, flat, rocky. And I notice consistently, like in the winter when we have snow and my footing is conformable, my horses have amazing frogs, amazing hoof concavity.
Mhm.
And then I hit the middle of summer and the terrain's abrasive and they're wearing their heels away and their feet are splaying out because the surface is so hard and unforgiving.
Yeah.
So I ran an experiment last year with one of my mares and I put boots on her with conformable pads. Like I specifically chose a pad that was going to conform very strongly to the hoof. She's not lame. She doesn't have any hoof issues. She's a sound horse, but I wasn't liking the shape of her feet. And like 4 weeks in, like one trim cycle, the insane difference in concavity and the health of her frog and the height of her heels was insane. And that was just from like creating a more conformable surface and taking away the abrasion. It's very interesting. So it made me really think about like what I need to do to fix some areas of my footing. So we ended up adding pea gravel to our shelter where they stand a lot of the time. It doesn't fix my problem entirely because they still travel on that abrasive hard footing in the summer. There are seasonal changes that I can't get around, but it was interesting to watch that happen. Yeah.
Definitely. That's awesome. I guess for me, everything comes back to species appropriate care. So that then follows, that makes me think, you think about where horses evolved, like big open plains where it's not going to be very hard because it's grassy, right? It's not going to be very hard footing. It's going to be slightly conformable, but not mud, not super soft. So I guess trying to recreate, it makes so much sense why sand, it's abrasive and it shifts too much. So it doesn't support the soft tissues the same way that pea gravel does. Okay.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting too, like I had quite a few Mustangs in my practice, and seeing feet that came like directly from the wild, like how different, like a year in, depending on the management situation, the feet would look so different. Like they would go from really concave with big wide frogs to like flat and sad looking frogs. Not everywhere. Like I had some clients that their horses lived on pea gravel and their feet really stayed quite the same, but it's so interesting to see like a true wild horse, what their feet looked like coming in. And then like a year after being in like a more domestic situation. It's so interesting to watch it change.
Oh, yeah,
the hoof is so dynamic. I think that's the key here is like, and that's why it's so important to document hoof landings because they're often the first sign that something in that dynamic hoof structure is changing either in a positive or negative way.
Yes.
And I guess we've talked about toe first landings and how heel first landings are what we're looking for, but are heel first landings always sound landings? Or can they sometimes be a red flag? Are there times when you see a heel first landing and you're like, this actually is a pathological heel first landing?
Yes. Yes, definitely. I think if they're sore in the front of the foot, they're going to want to try not to land on the front of the foot. What's in the front of the foot? The pedal bone. What happens with inflammation around the pedal bone? That's generally laminitis. It could also be
pedal osteitis.
It could be even a bone infection. It could be an abscess, anything like that. So I guess you need to know what's normal for your horse on different surfaces, which is where documenting is so important. But a really exaggerated super heavy toe flick and then a big slam down on the back of the foot at just a forward walk, looking at the whole animal in context can be, it can be telling. I
Hmm.
guess, okay, so when I cook, I say, I don't, I measure with my heart. I measure garlic with my heart. I measure stock. I measure herbs with my heart, blah, blah, blah. And I kind of am a little bit the same with hoof care. And so it's hard to put that into
Define.
it's hard to define that, right? So because it's context specific.
Yeah.
But if I'm looking at a horse that's moving and having, because my own horse has got a really exaggerated heel first landing to the point where a lot of professionals, if they saw it in isolation, would be like, there's something going on in the front of that horse's foot. But if you zoom out and see my horse moving, when she has this super exaggerated heel first landing, you see the whole horse is moving with a nice cadence, with lightness, like a bit of joy in her body. Like you can see that she's happier. When she goes back to just almost like a more subtle heel first landing, that's her guarding herself and guarding her movement. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is that you might see a really exaggerated heel first landing with guarded movement. Would that make sense? Not necessarily
Yeah.
short or, not necessarily short. It just depends on your horse's normal.
Yeah, I've always described it to owners because if they're concerned about toe pain or laminitis or a landing that's a heel first landing that's pathological, it's almost like there is a stiffness through the shoulder
Yes.
where like they're guarded, but they want to avoid a part of their foot, the toe or whatever. So they're moving almost stiffly through higher up the limb, and then by the
Yes.
time the heel hits, it's tense instead of like a fluid heel first landing.
Yes.
It's like almost like a tense and then that drop down that's like, I mean, I've seen some horses drop down almost like a slow motion sort of because they
Mm.
don't want to hit that toe too fast. But then I've seen horses, I saw one horse that had a pretty severe I'm trying to remember if it was like a severed deep digital flexor tendon or if it was just a severe tear, who did
Yeah.
like a snap. And it was like because that tendon was not there to like regulate that movement of
Yeah.
that limb.
And the extensor. And some horses have got bigger and chunkier extensor tendons, and that my mare does, and that will give a more obvious toe flick. And other horses have got like a less strong extensor tendon, so they're not going to have as obvious of a toe flick and then a heel first. I think a big thing for people is seeing the big toe flick and not necessarily seeing how the heel lands. If there's a big toe flick and then the heel still lands nicely, like not a slam, not a really jarring landing, then I think that's normal for that horse. If they have a nice big, like feel the anatomy, palpate the anatomy, if that's got a nice big, thick, easily palpatable extensor tendon, that would make sense in my head as well. So it's down
Oh,
to individual anatomy.
I have a question, and
Yeah.
this is for my own. Maybe the viewers will find it interesting too. What is your mare's pastern conformation like? Is it more sloping or is it more upright? Because
She
this is
lives
something I've just started thinking about.
So the conformation of her pastern, she does have a little bit of a long pastern. I don't think she's, yeah,
Yeah,
you would agree, Kat?
I'm asking because my gelding, my older gelding, because I was listening to Alicia say like when they're trying to protect something, like they're more stiff
Yes.
through the shoulder, and I always thought my gelding had that really exaggerated heel first landing because he does have thin soles, like there's
Mm.
no question. But when he moves, he like doesn't move like an unsound horse. He's very free through the shoulder. He tracks up really nice, and I'm thinking he does have DSLD, so maybe there's some like slackness in the back of his leg, but he also has a very sloping pastern. So like, does
Yeah,
that impact how that landing happens?
I would suspect it has to.
yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
it would have
I know
to.
that who is it? Dr. James Rooney, he wrote a book, The Lame Horse. He was a biomechanics guy, like through and through. And he wrote that book in 1974. And actually, Becky, you basically referenced it because he was the one who sort of started the idea that the navicular issues are coming from toe first landings and soft tissue damage that's leading to bone damage. And so he has a whole section in that book talking about how horses with like short upright pasterns have, they have to adjust like how they're moving, and that can cause more pressure onto the navicular bone. Because when I was searching for answers for my navicular gelding, when, he was first diagnosed, he has such short upright pasterns. And when I read that in Dr. Rooney's book, I was like, oh, dang it. He's like destined to have issues because it's like all these forces coming down through this short little pastern. But I don't know if that's, I mean, this was 1974, so I'm not saying that I don't even know where that's gone since then. If anybody's seen anything with pastern angles or lengths in regards to soundness.
No, it was just a question. But actually, Alicia, was the same gelding one of the horses that was in that social media video that we posted?
Yeah, yeah. And so Vinny, he is my Mustang gelding that got me into hoof care, and he does have navicular issues, but when he had really severe DDFT tears, he was not fully extended. He was very he would protect himself and he would move so choppy. Like he just looked like he was a table and
Mm.
like a flat back and four legs and just and not
Yeah.
even not in a laminitic way, but just like his body just hurt. He just didn't feel good. And so the last video on the social media post was Vinny, but he was like actually having a that was him when he was doing well. So he was fully extending, happily landing.
Yeah.
And I was so excited about that video. I actually sent it to Nick Barker, who owns Rockley Farm, to be like, oh my goodness, he is like happily landing on this back half of the foot, which has caused like the back half of the foot, which has caused so much pain for him in the past. And
Yeah.
so it was hard, not hard. I kind of, you kind of let it roll off your back, but you see literally hundreds of comments being like, "Oh my goodness, that last horse. That's
Yeah.
so painful. That landing is so painful." And I'm like, "Oh my goodness, if you just knew Vinny. Like
No.
if you just
Yeah.
knew him and his story."
I guess
But
that's the context they're missing, and that's the difficulty in a quick social media post. And we've had some comments recently on some other posts where we'll say, which hoof looks healthier, what do you see about this movement, blah blah blah. And there are some people saying, well, I don't have enough context to be able to comment on it,
mhm.
which is true, right? Because if the people seeing that video knew the context of Vinny, then they would have a completely different view of his landing. I don't know. That looked like a really nice landing to me. And
I thought it was really
it
nice.
was
Yeah.
it was very nice landing.
It's funny because I filmed the other two horses, horse A and horse B, and I knew when I filmed them because they were intakes to the farm, both of them were lame.
Yeah.
And so the first horse was landing obviously toe first, and then the second horse was kind of wobbling between flat and toe first. But I
Mm.
knew that in a lameness evaluation, both of those horses were lame.
Yeah.
And so to have people be like, "Oh, B is the soundest horse." I was like,
Yeah.
"Well, no." I mean,
Yeah.
she's actually lame.
And that was, they were diagnosed like by a veterinarian with their
Yes,
lamenesses before they came, before those
yes,
videos were taken. Yeah.
right. And
I
a
think that
hoof-based lameness for both of them.
Yes.
and that really undercuts the importance of watching landings is an extremely important piece of the puzzle. It's not the
Mm.
whole puzzle. There's
Yeah.
so much else that is taken into consideration, and your hoof care provider, whoever they are, will hopefully know the other pieces of the puzzle. It's not looking at the landings in isolation or the hoof balance as the horse stands statically in isolation, or it's a whole horse picture.
Yeah.
And having a good team is important too, because your hoof care provider may not know everything about body compensation or body work, and so having a good body worker, having a good veterinarian who knows what diagnostics to run and what to investigate when things go wrong.
Yeah.
But looking at your horse's landings and knowing what's normal for your horse is, I think, where you can start noticing differences when they happen early, because I think that's
Yeah.
when you can, like, that's the best time for intervention, is when something changes subtly, but you can see it specifically. I don't think we've mentioned yet, we're talking about slow motion video at
Yeah,
the ground
yes.
level of the horse walking, like side, so the side of the horse is to the camera. Those subtle changes, if you can catch them early, you can have a discussion with your hoof care provider, with your veterinarian, and investigate before they become more, especially if it's soft tissue. The sooner you catch it and do something about it, the better chance of a good prognosis.
Definitely.
Yeah, it's so funny how now I've read so many social media posts, like how you now know the common arguments against things. Like I've seen people, especially on the comments on the social media videos of people saying, well, for example, when Lisa was talking about the biomechanics of the distal limb, and how I think you can compare it to people. I've read from, certain trim methodologies that, the a heel first landing is, or no, sorry, we're talking about breakover. That was it.
Yeah.
You were talking about breakover and how it affects the limb. And I've read from certain methodologies, well, breakover doesn't, or the length of the breakover doesn't affect the limb or the toe, I should say, because horses are quadrupeds and not bipeds. So they have three other limbs that can take the weight when they're lifting one limb off. And instead of like a person who's propelling themselves forward on two legs, a
And
horse.
falling onto the limb. Yeah.
Yes. And so
I remember that
I
comment.
think I know. And so it's funny how, I mean, that was one thing that I was just thinking about when, people can so easily hear our discussion and be like, well, I have something to like correct you on, and think that maybe we aren't aware of these kind of arguments. Or there was another one that was saying how, well, a horse should land flat because the coffin bone should be ground parallel. And when they land flat, then the coffin bone is flat, which I disagree with both of those statements. Like things like that, where I think that there's almost like some people have like a gotcha of, well, you haven't heard of this before.
It's like,
At
yes,
this
we
point,
have.
I think we've heard it all.
We've heard a lot of it.
Yeah.
And the evidence and the research, it's not perfect, but and the problem is that you can't just Google in Google Scholar equine heel first landing and find a paper or a bunch of papers that say yes, horses should land heel first. It just doesn't. There's not enough ongoing. There's not enough research.
Haven't been able to watch horses for long enough to be able to like make that conclusion. That's not how the science is working. There's not enough money in the industry.
Yes, thank you. Because how much would it cost to set up that study? You would need, animal studies are really difficult because you need to get animal ethics approval, and you tend not to have, you need to do some pretty like high numbers to get your statistics to tell you, to help you answer the question that you're asking, right? If you don't have high enough numbers, then it's not as a robust a study, okay? So, you tend to, animals, especially horse studies, because they're expensive. Horses are expensive. So to keep them as research animals is difficult. So you tend to only have 6, 8, if you're lucky, 10 horses in a study. And that N of 10 or less is very difficult to get the numbers to tell you anything. Yeah. So the evidence is more geared towards the whole body of evidence pointing you and like telling a story and leading you to a conclusion, rather than here is a study that says horses should land heel first. Here it is. Or here is 10 studies that say horses should land heel first. I think people don't quite understand that that's how evidence works, science works.
If you're doing a study on something, when it comes to the money piece of it, funding has to come from somewhere. So like in my case, when I've done research, it's been funded through a grant. Grants are very competitive. And if your study is going to, if it's, I don't know how to say this, it needs to advance the science in a really specific and
well, it's going to help the industry. So it's going to help a racing industry that's going to make money, or it's got to help high-end performance horses, or somewhere where there's money to make more money.
That return on investment, unfortunately, is part of the funding.
Right.
Right. And so the thing that I always tell people when you're looking at a study, whatever study it is you need to see how it was funded.
Mm.
And the fact of the matter is that like academically funded studies through academic grants are very few and far between. Those are the ones where you're going to see people just wanting to answer interesting questions.
Yes.
Most studies are there because they're going to help support, like you said, an industry. So the pharmaceutical industry or the racing industry, the breeding industry, the supplement industry. And those are typically privately funded by the companies that are interested in that information because it helps them
And they
do
go
business.
into it with a hypothesis of what they wanted to get out of that study.
Yes. And so you get into biases, and Lisa's right. Like in animal studies, like that, the number of animals that you're able to use, like I've done animal studies, the statistics is really hard. To me, sometimes the statistics, so many things happen in animal studies too. Like I did an entire study on the cortisol response in sheep. It was dependent on like how they were handled in a laboratory setting. You know, it was like clicker training versus traditional handling, and we had to scrap the entire study. It was 2 years of work because some of our sheep ended up being pregnant, and that impacts hormones. And that, so like things happen. You know, I did a study on birds, and like my original number of birds was like 30 birds. And in the process of that happening, we had several birds that had to be released back into the wild because they weren't doing well in captivity. And like my number went from 30 down to like 20. And then you have to justify that in your paper. And sometimes studies go through the peer review process and they don't make it through.
Yeah.
Even if the information is good. So yeah, it's hard. It's really hard with animals to get.
There's reason for that, right? Because like the scientific process tries to reduce the effect of bias and all of that stuff that we were talking about before about funding and whatnot. So just because a study is funded by someone that wants that study to support what they're saying doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad study or what they're saying is not true.
Right.
It's just one clue that you're looking at in the context of the whole study.
Yeah.
When you go to university in a science degree, you are taught how to read studies because it's not something that it's not it's a skill. It's a really hard skill that is difficult to do well. Yeah. We're getting a little bit off track here, but I think it's important to say that.
Yeah, and I think like bringing it back to biomechanics, I think it's really important to note that some of the world's leading researchers in biomechanics disagree. So like I've heard Dr. Renata Weller talk, I've heard Pat Riley talk, I've heard Dr. Jenny Hagen talk, I've read Professor Denois, and they, those are just four examples. They will disagree with each other and have studies that might seem to contradict each other. And that I think just asks more, calls for more questions. And we do need to do more studies. Something that really blew my mind when I was in a conference that Dr. Weller was talking in was she was saying had a whole presentation about how bones break and tendons rupture. And her sort of what we were talking about earlier with repetitive strain type injuries, her main focus was horses change how they're moving in different environments, like based on their footing. Are they turning? Are they circling? Are they going in a straight line? Are they going uphill? Are they going downhill? What gait are they at? Whatever, to protect themselves from overstraining any one structure too much. If they're always landing heel first, whether they're going uphill, downhill, turning on a sharp turn, in deep footing, hard, like if they're always landing the exact same way all the time, that can hurt. She was saying that can overload structures and cause breakdown. Whereas if they're able to subtly change how they're moving, given their environment, given their job or whatever they're doing, that is actually preserving their structures. And so as much as we're talking about, I love to see heel first landings, we also qualified it with, well, we want it to be on a flat level surface in a straight line. Well, I mean, not always in a straight line, but you know what I mean? It has to be on a flat level surface, and that's how we're assessing it, and that's how we're knowing if this horse in our eyes is comfortable. But in movement or out in a hilly field or wherever, they are going to be adjusting how they move so they're not injuring themselves in an ideal world.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a lot. There's going to be a lot of questions. I think that we'll never have the peer-reviewed research that we want, at least not probably in our lifetime.
No, we won't.
But if anyone wants to fund us, I'm sure we're all happy to go and do the research.
I have
Yeah.
I have a study that I want to do on heel first landings and digital cushions and whatnot, and it's all ready to go. I just need to do it.
Just need to win the lottery.
I would happily be involved. I have some stuff about like balance and HPA and stuff that I would love to.
Yeah. And it's not going to answer the like the big questions. I think the evidence, right, is very important. We are evidence-based people, science-based people, blah, 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 and we're educated. So in our educated opinions, this is how things work, right? And it makes a lot of sense that heel first landings are ideal in most situations. But let's take a step back and look at the whole picture. Does the horse look happy without anthropomorphizing them? But does the horse look content?
Yeah.
Does the horse move in such a way that it can enjoy? Like, I love watching horses move with joy. Like, you know, when they're silly and they toss their heads and they canter off and they're like, woo, this is fun. Like, are they enjoying living in their own bodies?
Yeah.
Right? I think that's where it needs to come back to for me.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that this is such a big subject and it's so difficult to condense it into a listenable podcast. So I guess we can just say keep an eye out on our socials because we will be putting more and more and more information out about this.
And we have a really cool whole course on anatomy that you go into lots of detail on all of this, Lisa. So
yes,
if anyone
I do.
wants to deep dive into that rabbit hole.
Yeah, we have an anatomy course on Hoof to Horse Academy. So and more lessons coming for that at some point.
I mean, like you said, it's a really big subject. And I think the key for listeners, the takeaway is know it's normal for your horse. Talk to your professionals if something changes.
Yeah.
And document it so that you know what's going on.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Slow motion video is your friend. Most mobile phones, cell phones have a slow motion video now option. So it's quick and easy to take.
And we do have a video on our social media, how to take slow motion videos so that you can do it by yourself. Because I have had owners that were like, but I don't have anyone to film for me. But you can do it if you have a bucket. So a bucket and a phone. So we have a whole video on how to do that if you're wondering.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah. Thank you, guys.
Wonderful discussion as per usual. I can't wait for next month.
Yeah.
I did have this quote that I pulled up and then we kind of like went down another topic. I just want to share it with you because it's one of my favorites. But Tammy always says that the feet are an expression of the motion possibilities of the limb above. And at some point, the foot shape will lock in the motion possibilities of the limb above.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Both. Like everything's compensating for other things.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome.
All right.
Thank you very much. I'll upload this.
Have a good day.
See you guys.
Bye.
See ya.
Thanks for listening to today's Hoof to Horse podcast. If you enjoyed our discussion, be sure to check out the Hoof to Horse Academy, an online learning platform for horse enthusiasts and professionals. You can find us on all your favorite social media platforms. We look forward to you joining us for our next episode.